First of all, thank you. The attendees list is filling up, which is great. So there's 40 people in there so far. Welcome everybody to our first attempt at doing something meaningful in these strange times. I think it's been fascinating so far. We've been able to see inside people's homes and see how well or poorly they've decorated their homes. So excuse the very bright lights because the camera's facing the window. So you can't see any of my lovely artwork. Thank you for signing up to these sessions. What we're going to do is we're going to keep this Zoom session open, and we're going to do all three in a row, but we're going to have about 10 minutes between each session. And this first session is going to be on the startups, freelancers, and self-employed responding to COVID-19. So that's the self-employed and startups themselves, but also the people who are finding themselves helping and supporting. So really pleased to be joined by Alison McGovern, who's MP for Wirral South and is on the Treasury Select Committee. Maggie O'Carroll, who is CEO of the Women's Org, and Matthew Brown, who is Director and Founder of Adding Value. And at some point we'll also be joined by another one of Make's tenants, Sally, who is the owner of Freedom Rose, but unfortunately she had a horrible news this morning that somebody had taken the opportunity to break into Freedom Rose. So not necessarily expecting her to be turning up on time. But we'll make a start anyway. So we're going to do a couple of minutes from each of the panelists to talk about who they are and then also the responses and the stories that they've seen. So obviously, like this is unprecedented times, and yes, some of the stories will have difficult and challenging tones to them, but also please do try to include some really great responses that you've seen out there. And I'll just pass it over to you. So if we could start with Maggie, that would be great.
Thanks, Liam, and it's nice to be here. I wish it was under different circumstances. However, it's good to have the conversation. My name is Maggie, and I'm the CEO of the women's organisation. We're a women's economic development agency headquartered in Liverpool, but operating across the Northwest and also nationally and internationally. What I would say is our primary activity here is around supporting businesses to start and grow, and we do that under a collective banner here in the Liverpool City region of Enterprise Hub. So we've been hearing, I suppose, the good, the bad and the ugly in relation to what's come out as a result of this health crisis and this pandemic, in terms of the real pain and anxiety that financial pain, but also personal distress that small businesses are feeling, and particularly self-employed freelancers and the newly self-employed in particular. I think one of the things is that also, and I know you'll be dealing with it later on in one of your panels, but it is an issue that we're also addressing, the issue of the social economy and social businesses. What are the issues? Well, effectively, we've seen in some cases and in many cases, small businesses, freelancers, their work has dried up literally overnight, or alternatively, whilst the work has maybe been put back into later in the year, but that creates a real issue because effectively many of these individuals are the breadwinners within their households, and whilst I think there has been good moves in relation to, or positive moves in relation to the government around their implementation around support for small businesses, there's a whole swathe of individuals, freelancers and self-employed individuals that will fall through that support mechanism because they haven't been in business long enough, or alternatively they haven't made a tax return or are not going to make a tax return, which makes them effectively ineligible. Now those individuals will therefore then be reliant on universal credit. That in itself has caused its own difficulty in terms of that system has been under a phenomenal amount of pressure anyway. So I think it's fair to say that this is not going to be an easy access for a resource, and more importantly, the resource itself is insufficient in terms of perhaps in order to be able to make their bill payments. So a variety of issues. What am I seeing? I am seeing a phenomenal amount of resilience in terms of small businesses and freelancers reshaping and recasting their businesses. We're also seeing, as a service, we're seeing individuals managing their own personal debt, which is with the assistance of the Citizens Advice Bureaus, that has been a success factor. But I think in the main, there's this whole swathe of individuals that have been left in limbo and left at the edges, if not steeped in poverty and distress. And I think we really need to look further than just universal credit than that. We have been lobbying government to have a resource made available for those, to have them be paid through they're registered self-employed. They should be paid the real living wage. So that would be a much better outcome for those individuals rather than being reliant on state benefits.
Thank you very much, Maggie. So Alison, would you like to go next?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Liam, and thanks to everybody who's joined us. This is kind of a whole new world and a whole new approach to public policy, and it's a terrible situation to be forced to do it. My hope for the medium term is that some of the innovations that we come up with to get us through these times will stand us in good stead for the future. And I think the way that we've swiftly moved to having these sorts of conversations online is really interesting for a number of reasons that I'll come to shortly. But I just wanted to take one step back, which is to talk a little bit about the process of that the government is undertaking in order to make its policy at the moment, because it's crazy. It's only 20 days ago that we had a budget, and the budget setting process for the UK government is a massive exercise, and it takes a huge amount of time and effort. And 20 days ago, the government put forward a budget that now everybody has forgotten about and is entirely useless, because it didn't take into account any of the current situation that we're in. So between the budget 20 days ago and just a couple of weeks really in time, we have been able across trade unions, business sectors and the third sector, members of parliament and others, we've really been able to fundamentally change and test many of the Treasury's assumptions about how it should support business and individuals in a downturn like this. And I just want to reflect on that, because what has happened in terms of the Treasury accepting the need for wage support in the broadest sense, and including many self-employed people, imperfect though the current schemes are, it is testing the Treasury's assumptions about what is a good thing for the UK Treasury to do in real time. So I think my first point is, whilst what the government is doing is not perfect, and as a Labour Member of Parliament, I reserve the right to call them for all kinds at any time I want, but whilst what they're doing is not perfect, it is different to what they've done before and necessary given the extreme nature of the economic situation that we're facing. So when it became clear that actually the health protections would create a whole different frame for the economy work within, colleagues from the TUC, the trade unions, the CBI, the FSB, all kinds of business organisations, including IPSI, who represent self-employed people, have been engaging very, very closely with Treasury officials. So crucially, not necessarily just politicians, but the senior Treasury officials whose first instincts will have not been to create income subsidies in this way for people. You know, there's a whole range of reasons why traditional economic thinkers would have said that this is a bad idea for the government to replace people's incomes, but it was seen as necessary given the health situation. So I think that's my second point, is basically those civil society actors have been able to influence the Treasury in a very proactive and good way. And I think that it's really worth us thinking about how we keep that relationship going after the crisis leaves its acute phase. Third point, obviously people will know, I'm sure, much about what the packages are that have been announced. And we're particularly thinking about the self-employed and small businesses in this discussion. And you know, the package for the self-employed, after the support for businesses' wages was announced, it was obvious that there were some gaps in it, and the biggest one was for the self-employed. So it took quite a bit of pushing to get that. The government accepted the case that there were a huge number of people who needed their support, and they accepted it. But we know that there's still gaps, and there is a number of organisations that have suggested improvements that could be made to the scheme. I won't detail all of those, but I just want to flag that the process of changing the support that's there is ongoing, that members of parliament are hearing from huge numbers of their constituencies explaining their individual situations, and they are making representations day by day to Treasury ministers and the business department ministers as we go. So whilst the Treasury is still resistant in terms of the support that it feels it can offer, we are making progress in a way that I didn't necessarily think that we would at the beginning, when it became clear what this crisis would mean. So that's a success, I would say. 3 final points to finish. There are 3 things I think that I would ask for everybody to keep on their agenda that I've been hearing from small businesses and others. First one, insurance, not related to what the government is doing, but rather what the government regulates. I've got a number of small businesses in my patch. I know this is true, like across the piece, particularly for people who have premises, and this is like very much the case for the social sector as well, in the social economy, that people really haven't had a good response from the insurance industry in terms of helping to recover some of the costs of this. And I think that's a big structural question for the insurance industry, that they'd allowed a situation where many of their customers might have thought they were insured for this outcome, for this eventuality, and it turned out that they weren't. How is that allowed to happen? The second point, obviously for those of us, I was first elected in 2010, so I did a lot of work at that time on the aftermath of the 2008 banking crisis. And there was a whole range of quite big sweeping reforms for the UK finance sector, including banks. But I'm still hearing far too many people talk about the inadequacy of their banking service. Spent quite a bit of time over the past few days talking to a couple of banks about this, and I think we have further to go on the culture within banks and their relationships with some of their customers. It's fair to say it's a mixed picture, some are better than others, and I know a lot of people might be thinking after this about changing their bank given their experience. So I think we have some way to go to explain back to the banking sector the experience that people have had, particularly those with very small businesses or who are self-employed, to communicate back to them the experience they've had and how we as society expect them to change. Which leads me to my final point, and Maggie just mentioned this quite rightly, which is how the labour market interacts with welfare state, with social security. Many of us have spent a long time unpicking what's actually happened with universal credit, and we know that for those people who are not covered by any of the other schemes, universal credit should be there offering them a basic level of support. The government rightly have put the value of universal credit up in response to what has happened, which is a good thing, but it doesn't cover everybody equally, and there will be gaps. But I think we need to have a bigger, more in-depth consideration here of some of the people who are falling through the gaps, whether they're on very short-term PAYE contracts. So they're doing a series of short contracts. This seems to be something that's particular to the creative sector. So they haven't been able to become a furloughed employee because they're not at this point an employee of anybody. Or whether it's people on contracts that are 0 hours, or whether it's people who have become self-employed very, very recently, so their previous work isn't being taken into account. You know, I think we need to really think about our labour market and what we want it to look like. What kind of working structures do we want? And if we want to maintain some of the creativity and freedom that comes with being self-employed, how do we have a system that we all pay into, that we can all share the benefits of, that means that those people are supported? Do we need a totally different kind of social unemployment insurance from the one that we have at the moment? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think that this whole situation is shining a very bright light onto labour market and a social security system that has basically been broken down over the past 10 years, and now is the time to be rewriting the rules of that. So there are some immediate things that need to be fixed, and I would encourage everybody to keep in touch with their Member of Parliament on that, because people are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to influence, and that influence is working, but there are some massive long-term questions. Thank you.
Amazing, thanks, Alison. You covered a lot of ground there, which is great. Yeah, no, it's great. Okay, so Matthew, can you introduce yourself and then cover some of the things that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. So just to introduce myself, I set up Adding Value. We're a financial management consultancy and accountancy practice, and we specialise in supporting social enterprises, charities, and fledgling businesses. So we view ourselves more than just a standard high street accountancy practice. We really want to be part of the social economy and support social businesses. So we work with lots of different types of organisations, large and small, from 2 million turnover charities down to micro businesses. So we've kind of seen a range of responses to what's happened here. And you can probably split it into sort of three phases. When all this started to happen, it was very much operational and functional. How do we sort of work from home? How do we practically close one place and open another space? Kind of last week was more about where are we now? What does my business model look like? Is it sustainable going forward? And this week is more thinking about, well, where do we go next? How do we survive? I think, like Alison said, we had a budget 3 weeks ago. Lots of organisations I work with have set a budget for the year. We just had to tail it up and just start again and say, well, what's our financial plan? How do we go forward? And in a lot of places, it's a complete rewrite of the business model. I think one thing to say is that there are winners and losers in this, and it's not the same for everybody. Some are doing better than others. And one of the perverse things here is grant-funded organisations that are highly reliant on grant are going to be surviving better than those who are more focused on trading. As that comes back to what the previous panelists were talking about, the legislation that's come in to try and support businesses, it's been brought in very rapidly, and as is the case with rapid legislation, it has imperfections in it, and there's some real cliff edges, isn't there, in the legislation. And I think that's going to be the trickiest part, is how to navigate those big holes. There's people who are going to fall through the gaps, and how we support them is going to be the main question, really. You know, I was talking to an employee who left employment on the 5th of March voluntarily. He wasn't made redundant, so we can't furlough him because he left voluntarily. He's already been P45, but he wasn't on the payroll. So it's really inequitable, I suppose, is the word. I think there's a few other points, really. One's about cash. Certainly in the self-employment legislation, we're having to wait until June until you get the grant. You know, to survive 3 months without a cash income is going to be really hard. And this comes kind of to the next point, which I know Alison talked about insurance companies. I think the next one on the radar is the banks, and you've already mentioned that there's difficulties in accessing the loan facilities, and there were last time during the credit crunch, the level of lending for small businesses was much less than anticipated because the banks are going through their standard sort of credit rating process. So I think there's going to be a big onus or a big spotlight on the banks and how they respond to actually facilitate cash flowing the economy for a couple of months. Yeah, and I suppose I'll just close with some societal responses, really, because yes, there's been rapid input into legislation here to try and support various parts of the economy. It's been very responsive rather than strategic, you might say. And I suppose society itself has responded in different ways, and there's been a lot of self-help and helping one another coming through in different various forms. And I think when you see some large organisations who just moved to make rapid redundancies at the very start of this process, kind of being called out on social media and then having to sort of retrench their positions, that's one positive, you might say. But my question would be, these are highly expensive interventions, and are they affordable in the long term? And will parts of society start to question the value of these interventions if this crisis continues for more than 3 months, 6 months, 12 months?
Great, thanks, Matthew. And I think that people are going to be interested to hear what advice, I mean, if any, at this point, we can give to people who find themselves in a situation where they are having to wait 3 months until June or whenever it is for the government to cash flow with the interventions that they said at the beginning. It looks like some of the other interventions have come on board really, really quickly. People are already able to apply for the small business grants that are measured against business rates. I mean, don't get me started on how perverse it is to just draw a line around business rates. Literally half of Make's tenants have got business rates bills and the other half don't, which is mad. And I think that I want to answer my own question before I look to the rest of the panel to help answer that question. If you find yourself in a situation within a community, then turn to each other and turn to those leaders in that community for that support. Something that Make is going to do for its tenants that are waiting for a government subsidy to come in a few months' time is basically not ask for the rent in that period. And we're working really, really hard to make sure that we have enough cash in our business that we can afford to support our tenants and our community in that way. I think that we'll be lucky because we already count ourselves as a community and as a community business, and we're working really, really hard to find the solutions that we can then pass on. And I think that if you find yourself even in a not too dissimilar situation, they're the kinds of conversations that you should be having with people. And I think people have been really responsive and really supportive so far. I haven't had one of Make's creditors give me a hard time yet. And I think it's because they understand what our plan is and how, if they help us, we can help so many more people. And it's been really, really nice to see that response. So does anybody else want to respond to my question about what sort of tangible advice you would give at this point? Yeah, go for it, Alison.
And Liam, just in case I didn't sort of make this absolutely clear enough, like if anybody has got practical issues, even if you're getting in touch with the local authority, be that City of Liverpool or Wirral or Sefton or whoever, please copy in your Member of Parliament, because there are daily phone conferences going on with government as well, and people desperately trying to push and make practical changes. Also, we have people on both sides of the question coming to us, asking for help and advice, and people who want to volunteer their help and people who need that help. So can also kind of signpost to everybody as well. So think of your Member of Parliament would be my bit of advice. But equally, I mean, I know that the local authorities have all set up a helpline. So make it someone else's problem. Ring the local authority and get them involved. As you said, Liam, you know, involve other people in your plan, and I think that helps. And I've seen real tangible examples of where people have had challenging situations and have got through them already. So get other people involved in the problem.
Perfect. Maggie, Matthew? You're muted, Maggie.
I was apologies if you couldn't hear me earlier. The question is now, can you hear me now? So if you're having
better.
Yeah.
Better.
I know you guys might be able to hear me, but I think our guests couldn't. I think there is a number of things. You're absolutely right. Advice is crucial, and don't be alone with this. And I think what you need to do is you need to get sort of advice at source in terms of should be able to. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm reading the questions as I go along. I should answer the ones I've been asked. What we can offer as a business support is you can access our advice lines still, and you can have Zoom calls and training as it is. Can I ask any business that's currently, whether you're self-employed, any business that's working and operating in Liverpool City region, if you do want to access support, do call Enterprise Hub on 0151 706 8113, and that's Enterprise Hub. Just tap it into Google if you missed that number. And in terms of the range of advice, there is such a variety of different, I suppose, elements to your own personal circumstances. For example, you could be a company that, or there are circumstances where perfect storms, insofar as is that what they are is that they're running their own company, but they're the sole director. They're paying themselves at a dividend at the end of the year. Lo and behold, they don't count for any of these. They don't fit into any of these particular schemes. Liam, I know you alluded to or mentioned the issue of individual freelancers that maybe are sole traders that are operating from your facility, the Makes facility, and effectively they're not eligible for the £10,000 because they don't pay business rates. We're currently lobbying quite hard in relation to that, because we're saying that actually if the landlord can prove that they have a license or a tenancy arrangement with them, and that they've got their business address based there and they've got their taxation based there, that is sufficient evidence that they actually do exist as a business. If they're paying self-employed, or if they're operating on a self-employed basis, why shouldn't they be able to access this £10,000 grant? I think we are working with local government, and we're working with national government departments to actually demonstrate that these payments are needed, A, and B, they will have the desired outcome of the retention of jobs and also the sustainability of the business in the short to medium term. So what I would say is that you're not alone on this. There is advice available. Drop an email, get in touch. Enterprise Hub will be there to assist.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Matthew?
Yeah, just reading through the questions.
There's loads, yeah.
Yes, adding value. We're quite happy to support all the questions that you're coming through, which is about furlough and the legislation. We take the legislation as we can best interpret it and try and work our way through and support our clients to do that. So we're very happy just to help whoever needs some help to get through these things. Oh yes, one thing I wanted to say was on the self-employed, if you haven't done your tax return for 2018-19, which was due by the 31st of January, the HMRC have given an extension to the 23rd of April to do that. If you need some help getting your tax return done, give us a shout and we'll try and help you along with that. We're here to support, and I think there's lots of, as Maggie's saying, there's lots of people in the city who just want to help, and it's kind of everyone muddling through together, isn't it? So some of the more practical questions on the chat, I'm happy to respond to separately, but that offer of help is there.
Liam,
Alison,
can I just answer one of the other questions on the Q&A?
Yeah, pick one.
Somebody has asked how Parliament making decisions, and how are government able to, it's Lucy from Growing Suddenly, I think, who asked how we're making decisions and how we're scrutinising the government at this time, which is a really interesting question that I could talk for about 3 hours without taking a breath on.
Session 4.
But I'll save that for another day. But the short answer is like this. So technically Parliament is in recess at the moment, but many select committees, including the Treasury Select Committee and the Health Select Committee, and a number of others, are still holding sessions which you can watch online. Most of the select committees have Twitter accounts. If you follow them, then you can get the links to their sessions. Second point, there's a big debate going on amongst parliamentarians about whether the whole of the House of Commons, and I guess potentially the House of Lords, should also meet online as well. It would be a significant reform. At the moment, our standing orders do not allow the House of Commons as a big body to meet online, and we're definitely not allowed to vote online. Absolutely not, no. Particularly the traditionalists in Parliament do not want us to do that, because it would obviously be a breach with tradition, and the progressives, of which I count myself one, think that if we can do online banking, surely the House of Commons should be allowed to vote online. So we're having a bit of a battle about it at the moment, but my meeting directly after this, and apologies, I'll have to leave potentially a bit before it ends. My meeting directly after this is a private briefing for the Treasury Select Committee with Andrew Bailey, who's the Governor of the Bank of England. And the Treasury Committee, in any case, has been absolutely determined to keep scrutiny going. So watch this space on online House of Commons.
Amazing, thank you. Panelists, if any other questions on that list that you want? I've flagged a few, but there's some here if you want to pick any. So there's one here. Should we have heard already about the small business rates, who pays, etc., etc., from Luke again. So as far as I'm aware, local councils have issued or are in currently issuing the letters, would you believe? And no doubt they will be going to the business address that the business rates is for. But you can also get in touch with them online. So I think a quick Google would reveal how you would do that. You can definitely get in touch with them online. I think that they were reluctant at first to do that. Matthew? Yeah,
there is a form. I'm sure I just sent the link in that chat, but there is a form
amazing.
To do your application now.
Amazing, yeah. And I would say definitely, even if you think you may or may not, just get that form filled out.
Also on tenancies, somebody's asked about what we think the likelihood is of big landlords responding positively to the current situation. The government has issued some exhortations to business. I think it was in the emergency legislation that people shouldn't be evicted. Obviously, it remains to be seen how landlords respond to this situation. I think, like most everything else, we will have a range of responses, and some landlords will seek to be helpful and others won't. And we're going to have to play it by ear, but this is definitely something that is a live question, and I would welcome, if anybody's got any experiences on how landlords are responding at the moment, please do just send me an email or get in touch on social media, because I would really welcome people's experiences on this at the moment.
I think there's a response here about, or a question here from Erica Rushton, interested about the best responses we've seen. In actual fact, one of the best responses has been where resources have just arrived in the small business bank account directly. Now, obviously, if people are paying rates and they're paying them via BACS rather than check or whatever, clearly the local authority have got their banking details. So, in County Durham, for example, they have been just arriving in in businesses' bank accounts. And that is a much better way than actually businesses having to take time. After all, they are trying to, they're dealing with a tsunami of other issues to make the application. But in fairness, if you look on, for example, Liverpool City Council, it's a straightforward process in terms of the application process. And feedback thus far is that that's been a positive process. And again, I think the same thing in terms of Wirral Borough Council. I haven't had any feedback from other local authority areas yet, but it will be coming in the next. It's only getting up and running really. So we'll probably know a little bit more in the next few days, and certainly within the next 10 days. But business is nearly as they say. A day is a long time in politics. Oh my God! Today, these days, every hour there's a changing dimension. What I would say about the tenancy issue is an interesting one. It's not the landlords per se I'm worried about. What I am worried about is the tenants that are co-workers, the ones that are operating in the likes of the Baltic Creative and Avenue HQ and these co-working spaces, and they're running businesses and employing people, and they're operating in those areas. We just need to have a mechanism where we can demonstrate that. And I think if you are talking and you're using any of your influence, Alison, please do try and get some clarification on that, because some local authorities are taking the view that co-working space, as long as you can prove that you're a business and operational and that you are tenants you've licensed and your landlord is paying the collective business rates on your behalf and they're charging you business rates, that they should be entitled to access the £10,000 grant. At the moment, it is being interpreted differently by different local authorities up and down the country, and I think we need clarity on that situation.
Yeah, to me, that's part of the of the issue is that it's open to interpretation, and actually the most liberal end of the spectrum in interpretation is really should be the thing that's commonly applied. Like if this is partly about quantitative easing and it's partly about easing the suffering of individuals, but also giving more chance to more businesses, big deal if some businesses happen to be able to apply a couple of times or whatever. It's just, to me, such a small issue compared to ensuring on the other end of the spectrum that everybody who is possibly eligible in one interpretation or another is able to receive those grants. So are there any other questions that people are seeing in here that they'd like to pick out? So there's one here from Kate Lucy. We all know that mental health is really important at the moment. I'm in the final stage of my training as a counsellor, and I'm able to offer limited sessions, which is great. So Kate is put her email address in there. But Maggie, I think that it's something that you probably have experienced directly with your work at the Women's Org. How are people, particularly freelance and self-employed and such, how are we going to deal with the fallout that this will impact?
It's the critical thing. I can speak on behalf of our own organisation and a staff team. When you have to, transfer, over 60 staff within, literally a few days, to working from home, that in itself is a terrible. And then all of this noise in terms of the actual fear and misinformation, it's terribly damaging in terms of people's mental health. I think Kate's absolutely right. It's absolutely crucial that it should be, because we are going to get through this. The question is, it's not just a question. It's what's the impact of that? What's the collateral damage? And people's mental health is going to be the collateral damage. The fact of the matter is that it's odd for people not to have social contact, that in itself. But the idea and the notion that they may have not social contact, but then be working behind screens. And so I think there's a variety of things. Firstly, you know, the idea of, and I think it's a great offer from Kate in terms of you know, or it's a great question and a great issue a very important issue to bring up. I think number one, you know, we've been putting out a lot of messages which are not just about keeping your business alive, but it's about keeping you sane, and mechanisms to ensure that you can do that. And that is about, you know, making sure that you're not isolated. The other thing is around work practices, about here we are, we're working, you know, already we're attached to our mobile phones and probably tech a little bit too much anyway. Is this going to absolutely explode beyond belief now, where we're, you know, it's a 24-hour day and we're going to be sort of, you know, constantly have a camera attached to or a body cam attached to our heads? Problematic. But just the very fact that we're in a huge, we need to recognize, and we need to be able to, for employers to recognize that it's very difficult for their employees, and they need mechanisms to be able to help them cope with that. You know, these welfare support or mental health support mechanisms are, you know, I think employers, where they can, need to invest in them. Second thing is they need to encourage Google, or sort of, as I say, coffee breaks in the middle of the day where people get together and talk nothing about work. They just talk about, well, actually, they're probably, a lot of them are talking about the pandemic itself, but anything but, really. Moreover, our advice to our own employees is about stop, read the news once, have the news input once a day, and stay away from the Daily Mail.
And the Sun. Alison, do you want to make a
universally good advice, Maggie? Universally good advice. I just wanted to ask one other question that somebody had asked about the furlough scheme.
Yeah, go for it.
Because this is also a live question. So obviously, if you're a small business, considering whether or not to furlough your staff, then one of the issues might be what the flexibilities are within the furlough scheme. So if you need to be basically getting the support so that people's incomes are protected, but at the same time considering how your model of business might need to change, then you might still need some of your staff,
part of them.
And this is quite a big problem. And my recommendation would be to get advice on this point, because some of the guidance is there already and can help. So for example, you don't have to furlough people forever. You can furlough people for a short period of time. But the TUC and CBI both yesterday in their briefing to Treasury Select Committee both thought that there needed to be a kind of flexible approach taken to the furlough scheme, in particular because the whole point of the scheme is to keep people close to the labour market. It's to keep people able to just quickly rejoin that business as a full-time or part-time or whatever member of staff when the situation changes. So that we don't end up with huge scale unemployment, which would be permanently damaging. So it will be against the interest of the scheme if the scheme's not flexible enough to allow businesses to help their staff to keep in touch with the business and help the business move through the situation. But this is a live question that we're currently pushing on. So one of the obsessions that I have is that I think at the moment, because a furloughed member of staff, they retain their employment rights, but they're not at work, so they can't be told to do something by their employer. They can't be told to do training by their employer. So while somebody could voluntarily up their skills whilst they're a furloughed member of staff, it makes it a bit difficult for businesses to think about this in terms of the opportunities that come from reskilling whilst the furlough scheme is operating. So there are a couple of places where we need to make the scheme better and improve it, and I would really ask for people's help in doing that. I think somebody had mentioned how the conversations with government are going on and how people can feed back and feed in, and Maggie's already made the point about various things that they're lobbying on. I would also flag, we're part of a city region that has a combined authority, which has proved itself to be a very, very helpful structure during this period. So if you can feed your views in through the combined authority, either through your member of parliament, through a councillor in the cabinet, or by contacting Steve Rotherham as well directly, then that is definitely helping us to improve what the government is offering. But yeah, on the furlough point, I think we need to just make sure that it can be as flexible as possible.
Yeah,
Right. Matthew, do you want to make a final point?
Yeah, I think it's a real big issue, because furlough, you're either in work or not in work. And coming back to Maggie's point about the mental health thing, if you're furloughed and you can't work, there's a whole impact about feeling useful and all the rest of it, isn't there? Yeah, a lot of organisations wanted to part-time furlough people, or some may do that, but that, again, that's not possible under the current arrangement. So yeah, again, the cliff edges in the policy are real problems.
Great. Maggie, final point?
Just in terms of, there was a question here on supporting students at the start of their career in the creative sector from Elaine Mack. And some of them have had their placements cancelled and concerned about graduate employment and business startup. What would the panel advise in relation to these students? Well, I think it's interesting because I've just come off a Zoom meeting with my own one of my own teams, and we have graduate placements on that as part of that team. I would suggest that I would ask all of those students to re-engage with the placement providers and actually ask them if they can do it via Zoom and they can actually be involved. So even though they might have been cancelled in person to person, they still may be involved. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that in terms of seeking another placement, in terms of anybody who's if there are students concerned, now is the time to make yourself, to be cognizant and to actually make contact through social media with companies. They've got a little bit more time. I think Alison has to go.
That's okay.
Yeah, apologies,
That's
everyone.
okay. That's fine. No worries.
Sorry. Thank you. It's really good to talk to you all.
Good luck.
Bye.
Thank you. So I think the main thing around that is to go back to the student body and say, revisit your placement placement offers, and also keep an eye on other placement opportunities via Twitter. Contact companies directly. I think they'd be far more open to it, believe it or not, than you think. And the other thing, of course, is in terms of business startup, again, I say, speak to our colleagues at Enterprise Hub, and they will be able to send out the market for the graduates, making, I suppose, promoting it among small businesses.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Matthew, as well. Thanks to Alison. Really informative. Sorry, I know there's loads of more questions that people want to answer. What we'll try and do is pull them all together and write a blog post on makeliverpool.com and try and cover them off. So Maggie, if you've got any that are catching your eye, feel free to sort of write some answers down, send them to us, and we'll communicate with everyone about that. Thanks for attending. We're just going to take a quick break now for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll start the next panel on the hour. Thanks, Mags.